Albert Camus began the myth of Sisyphus with a statement that shocked even philosophers. There is only one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. Before asking what is true, what is good, or what is beautiful, Camus believed we must first ask whether life itself is worth continuing. If life is not worth living, then every other question becomes meaningless. This was not a rhetorical flourish. Camus was responding to a world that had lost its faith in meaning. The old structures that once explained suffering, religion, tradition, metaphysics, had collapsed under the weight of war, science, and political catastrophe. Human beings were left with a world that functioned but did not explain itself. The universe continued, but it did not answer the human demand for meaning. Camus believed this silence was not abstract. It was something people felt in their daily lives. They went to work, loved, suffered, and aged, but increasingly they could not explain why. Their routines continued, but their sense of purpose weakened. Out of this gap between what people wanted and what the world offered, Camus identified a new condition, the absurd. The absurd for Camus was not despair, it was lucidity. It was what happens when a thinking mind confronts a universe that does not care. Humans ask for meaning. The world does not reply. That confrontation produces tension, and that tension is the absurd. Once this condition is recognized, the question of suicide becomes unavoidable. If nothing has ultimate meaning, if everything ends in death, if suffering is not redeemed by anything beyond itself, then why continue living at all? Camus believed this question had to be taken seriously. To dismiss suicide as weakness or madness was dishonest. Suicide was a logical possibility in an absurd world. If life has no ultimate justification, then ending it might appear rational. But Camus did not believe suicide was the answer. He believed it misunderstood the absurd. To end one's life is not to resolve the tension between human longing and cosmic silence. It is to destroy one side of the tension. Suicide removes consciousness. The absurd disappears, but only because the person who experienced it is gone. For Camus, this was not a solution. It was a surrender. Camus believed that suicide, while understandable, is a mistake about what the absurd really means. Many people think the absurd proves that life is worthless. Camus believed it proves something different, that life has no final explanation. Those two things are not the same. When a person commits suicide because life feels meaningless, they are making a hidden assumption. They are assuming that life must have meaning in order to be worth living. Camus rejected that assumption. Life does not need justification to be experienced. You do not ask whether the ocean has meaning before swimming. You do not demand that sunlight explain itself before feeling its warmth. Experience exists before explanation. Camus believed suicide is an attempt to escape the discomfort of not knowing. It is not just an escape from suffering. It is an escape from uncertainty. To stay alive is to continue facing the unanswered questions. To die is to silence them. But silencing questions does not answer them. Camus believed the absurd must be confronted, not avoided. To live is to feel the tension between wanting meaning and not finding it. Suicide removes the tension by removing the person. That is why Camus called it philosophical surrender. The absurd demands a different response, revolt. Revolt means staying alive without illusion. It means refusing both suicide and false hope. You accept that the world does not provide meaning, and you live anyway. This stance is difficult. It offers no comfort, but it offers clarity. You no longer pretend that life will be justified later. You live it now. Camus believed this is where dignity begins. A person who stays alive without believing in ultimate meaning is not weak. They are courageous. They are choosing to face reality as it is rather than flee from it. Suicide, in contrast, is a form of escape. It avoids the absurd instead of engaging it. It eliminates the problem rather than living with it. For Camus, the goal was not to be saved. It was to be awake. Camus believed that many people who contemplate suicide are not actually trying to die. They are trying to escape a form of unbearable pressure. That pressure comes from feeling that one's life no longer makes sense. When the story you tell yourself about who you are collapses, you feel as though you no longer exist in a meaningful way. This loss of narrative creates deep distress. People want their suffering to matter. They want their struggles to fit into a larger picture. When that picture dissolves, pain begins to feel pointless. Suicide appears as a way to stop the pain when no reason can be found for enduring it. Camus did not deny this pain. He believed it was one of the most honest experiences a human being can have. But he believed suicide misunderstood its source. The pain does not come from the absurd. It comes from demanding that the absurd provide meaning. When people demand that life justify itself, and it does not, despair grows. Camus believed the solution was not to end life, but to end the demand. To live without demanding that life makes sense is to remove the deepest cause of despair. This does not eliminate suffering, but it changes your relationship to it. Pain becomes something you experience, not something that condemns your existence. Camus believed suicide is a protest against a world that refuses to explain itself. But killing yourself does not make the world speak. It only silences the one who is listening. To remain alive is to continue the confrontation. It is to keep asking without expecting an answer. That persistence is revolt. Camus believed the absurd is not a conclusion, but a relationship. It exists only when a conscious human being stands before a silent world. If either side disappears, the absurd disappears. Suicide destroys one side of that relationship, consciousness, and therefore dissolves the absurd without resolving it. That is why Camus called suicide an evasion. The absurd is painful because it cannot be solved. It is the constant tension between what you want and what you receive. But Camus believed that this tension is precisely what gives life its intensity. Without it, nothing would matter. When you live with the absurd, you feel both the beauty and the fragility of existence. You know that nothing is guaranteed, and that knowledge makes every moment sharper. Suicide removes that sharpness by removing the person who feels it. Camus believed that rather than escaping the absurd, one should inhabit it. To live without appeal, without hoping for a final answer or a higher meaning, is to accept the absurd fully. This acceptance is not resignation, it is rebellion. You refuse to let the lack of meaning destroy your will to live. To live without appeal means you do not expect the universe to justify your existence. You do not wait for redemption. You live anyway. Camus believed this stance transforms despair into freedom. When nothing is promised, everything becomes possible. You are no longer bound by hopes that may never come true. You are free to live the life that is here. Suicide closes that freedom forever. That is why Camus rejected it. Camus believed that one of the deepest reasons people turn towards suicide is exhaustion, not just physical tiredness, but existential fatigue. It is the weariness of waking up day after day to a world that does not explain itself, a world that demands effort without offering meaning in return. Life begins to feel like an endless obligation. This is why Camus placed so much emphasis on repetition in modern existence. Work, routines, relationships, disappointments, everything cycles. People feel trapped inside patterns they did not choose and cannot escape. Over time, this repetition begins to feel pointless. Suicide appears as a way to step out of the cycle. But Camus believed that this exhaustion comes not from living itself, but from living while expecting something more than life can give. When you expect the world to justify your suffering, every day becomes a disappointment. When you expect meaning to arrive, every moment without it feels like a failure. Camus believed the way to relieve this exhaustion was not to end life, but to change how one lives it. You stop waiting for meaning and begin experiencing what is: a cup of coffee, a walk in the sun, a conversation, a breath. These do not answer the big questions, but they exist anyway. Camus believed that by turning toward immediate experience, you step out of the endless struggle to make life explain itself. Suicide is an attempt to escape the burden of being conscious. But Camus believed consciousness is not the enemy. The enemy is the belief that consciousness must be rewarded with meaning. When you let go of that belief, life becomes lighter. Not easier, but lighter. You no longer have to carry the weight of a cosmic explanation on your shoulders. You are allowed to simply exist. Camus believed that this shift is one of the most powerful responses to suicidal despair. You do not need to prove that life is worth living. You only need to live it. Camus believed that suicidal despair often arises when a person feels separated from the world. When everything feels distant, unreal, or disconnected, existence begins to lose its texture. Life turns flat. Days blend together. Nothing seems to touch you. This emotional numbness can be more painful than suffering itself. Camus believed this alienation is intensified by modern life. People become absorbed into systems, routines, and expectations that have little to do with their inner experience. They go through the motions of living without feeling truly alive. In that state, suicide can appear as a way to end the emptiness. But Camus believed this emptiness is not proof that life is worthless. It is proof that something essential has been lost, connection to immediate experience. The absurd world does not provide meaning, but it does provide sensations. You still feel wind on your skin. You still hear music. You still taste food. You still see light. These are not trivial. They are what life is made of. Camus believed that when people become suicidal, they have often lost contact with these simple realities. They live in their thoughts, their regrets, their fears. They forget the body, the senses, the present moment. To return to these is not a cure, but it is a re-entry into life. Suicide tries to end alienation by ending existence. Camus believed the real task is to end alienation while continuing to exist. That means turning back toward the world even when it hurts, feeling again, touching again, being present again. The absurd does not take these things away. It only takes away the illusion that they mean something beyond themselves. And that, Camus believed, is not a loss. Camus believed that one of the most dangerous aspects of suicidal thinking is the way it narrows a person's vision of time. When despair takes hold, the future collapses into a single image, more of the same pain. People begin to feel that nothing will ever change, that tomorrow will simply repeat today, endlessly and without relief. In that state, death appears to be the only way to stop time. But Camus believed this feeling is not a truth about the future. It is a distortion of the present. When you are in pain, the world shrinks, possibility disappears. The mind begins to mistake suffering for fate. The absurd does not say that life will get better, but it also does not say it will remain the same. It says the future is unknown. Suicidal despair pretends to know the future. It tells you it will always be unbearable. Camus believed this certainty is an illusion. The same uncertainty that makes life frightening also makes it open. You do not know what will happen next, and that means something else is always possible. To stay alive is to keep that openness. Camus did not offer hope in the traditional sense. He did not promise that things would improve. He offered something more honest. The future has not yet happened. To choose suicide is to decide that the story is over. To stay alive is to admit that you do not know how it ends. That not knowing is frightening. It is also freedom. Camus believed that in an absurd world, the refusal to end your life is a refusal to let despair write the final sentence. You continue, not because you expect a happy ending, but because you refuse to pretend you already know how it ends. That refusal is revolt. It is the decision to remain inside time instead of escaping it. Camus believed that suicidal despair is often driven by an unbearable sense of isolation. When people feel that no one truly sees them, that their pain is invisible, life begins to feel unreal. You start to feel like a ghost moving through the world unnoticed and disconnected. In that state, death appears as a way to be recognized, even if only through absence. Camus did not believe this longing for recognition was selfish. It was human. To be alive is to want to be seen. When that desire is unmet, existence begins to feel hollow. But Camus believed suicide does not restore connection. It ends it. To die is not to be understood. It is to disappear. What human beings need in despair is not an explanation, but presence. Someone to stand beside them without demanding that their pain makes sense. Someone to acknowledge their suffering without trying to erase it. Camus believed that solidarity is one of the strongest responses to suicidal despair. In an absurd world, no one has answers, but people can still be together inside their questions. This togetherness does not cure pain, it makes it bearable. When you are no longer alone, the weight of existence becomes lighter. Suicide pretends to solve isolation by removing the isolated person. Camus believed the real task is to keep the person and remove the isolation. That means staying connected even when it hurts. That is revolt in human form. Camus believed that one of the deepest lies suicidal despair tells is that your life is already finished. When someone becomes trapped in hopelessness, they begin to feel as though everything that mattered has already happened or failed. The future appears empty, as though it has nothing left to offer. But Camus believed this feeling is not a fact. It is a state of consciousness. The absurd world does not guarantee joy, but it also does not guarantee emptiness. It is open, and openness means that nothing is settled. Suicidal despair tries to close the book. Camus believed revolt means refusing to let the book be closed. You do not stay alive because you know what will come next. You stay alive because you do not. Camus believed this uncertainty is not a curse. It is the space where life still happens. Every relationship, every experience, every moment of beauty or pain exists inside that openness. To end your life is to declare that nothing new can happen, and that declaration is something no one can truly make. The future is not written, only the present is. Camus believed that when people are suicidal, they are often overwhelmed by the weight of everything they have already lived. Regrets, failures, losses, and shame pile up until existence feels too heavy to carry. But the absurd does not ask you to carry your entire past. It only asks you to live this moment, this breath, this second, this step. When you narrow your focus to what is happening now, the burden becomes smaller. You are no longer trying to justify your entire life. You are simply existing. Camus believed this is how revolt works at the most intimate level. You do not fight despair by winning. You fight it by continuing. You wake up, you breathe, you live. That persistence is not heroic. It is human. And for Camus, being human in the face of the absurd was enough. Camus believed that to live in an absurd world is to live without ultimate guarantees. There is no promise that suffering will be redeemed, no assurance that pain will lead to something better, no hidden meaning waiting at the end of time. For many people, this realization is terrifying. It feels like standing on open ground with nothing beneath your feet. Suicide appears, in this context, as a desire for certainty. To die is to end uncertainty. To die is to close the question. But Camus believed that this desire for certainty is precisely what makes despair so powerful. When people cannot tolerate not knowing, they try to escape the unknown. Suicide becomes a way to make the world stop being ambiguous. Camus rejected this. He believed ambiguity is not an enemy of life. It is one of its conditions. To live is to not know. To love is to not know. To hope, to fear, to struggle. All of it happens inside uncertainty. The absurd does not say that nothing matters. It says that nothing is guaranteed, and that difference is everything. Camus believed that the refusal to end one's life is an affirmation of this fragile openness. You choose to remain inside the unknown. You choose to continue without answers. You choose to let tomorrow remain unwritten. That choice is not optimistic. It is defiant. You do not stay alive because you believe everything will be fine. You stay alive because you refuse to accept that everything is already decided. Suicide says, "It is over." Revolt says, "It is not finished." Camus believed that this refusal to close the story is what keeps life alive, even in pain, even in despair, even when nothing makes sense. To continue is to keep the question open. And as long as the question is open, something new can still happen. That is why Camus believed suicide is not the answer to the absurd. It tries to solve the problem by erasing it. Revolt accepts the problem and lives with it. In an absurd universe, that is the highest form of courage. Camus believed that to live in an absurd world is to live without ultimate guarantees. There is no promise that suffering will be redeemed, no assurance that pain will lead to something better, no hidden meaning waiting at the end of time. For many people, this realization is terrifying. It feels like standing on open ground with nothing beneath your feet. Suicide appears in this context as a desire for certainty. To die is to end uncertainty. To die is to close the question. But Camus believed that this desire for certainty is precisely what makes despair so powerful. When people cannot tolerate not knowing, they try to escape the unknown. Suicide becomes a way to make the world stop being ambiguous. Camus rejected this. He believed ambiguity is not an enemy of life. It is one of its conditions. To live is to not know. To love is to not know. To hope, to fear, to struggle, all of it happens inside uncertainty. The absurd does not say that nothing matters. It says that nothing is guaranteed, and that difference is everything. Camus believed that the refusal to end one's life is an affirmation of this fragile openness. You choose to remain inside the unknown. You choose to continue without answers. You choose to let tomorrow remain unwritten. That choice is not optimistic. It is defiant. You do not stay alive because you believe everything will be fine. You stay alive because you refuse to accept that everything is already decided. Suicide says it is over. Revolt says it is not finished. Camus believed that this refusal to close the story is what keeps life alive, even in pain, even in despair, even when nothing makes sense. To continue is to keep the question open, and as long as the question is open, something new can still happen. That is why Camus believed suicide is not the answer to the absurd. It tries to solve the problem by erasing it. Revolt accepts the problem and lives with it. In an absurd universe, that is the highest form of courage. Camus believed that suicide is not a solution to the absurd, but a refusal to face it. It attempts to end the question by ending the person. But the absurd does not demand an answer. It demands a response. That response is revolt. To revolt is not to hope for meaning. It is to live without it, to continue without appeal, to remain awake in a universe that does not explain itself, to feel the full weight of existence and refuse to be crushed by it. In this sense, choosing to live is not naive. It is radical. Camus did not argue that life is good. He argued that life is, and that is enough. Every breath is a defiance of the silence of the world. Every step forward is a refusal to let despair decide for you. Every moment you remain is a declaration that even without meaning, you will live. The absurd does not promise happiness. It promises honesty. It tells you that nothing will save you, and then asks what you will do with that truth. Camus answered, you live. You live with clarity. You live with intensity. You live with rebellion. Suicide tries to escape the absurd. Revolt inhabits it. It stays inside the tension between longing and silence and refuses to surrender. That refusal is the heart of Camus' philosophy. Not hope, not despair, but defiant life.